There is an article that was my quick tutorial in this, How to Revitalize the World Bank, the IMF, and the Development Finance System, appeared on April 7th, so just around the corner, written by Prime Minister Motley and Rajiv Shah, that outlines the meeting that happened in Barbados that led to really the call to action and the plan. And so, Prime Minister Motley, could you outline for us, and I assume other people are watching this online outside the room, what spark happened in Barbados at that meeting, and outline the initiative?
What I can tell you is that we have had enough. I sat in this room just now and I listened to the Minister of Finance from Malawi talk about a cyclone that is the most powerful, one of the most powerful, and the longest lasting cyclone in world history. Let's be honest. How many people in here knew about it before he spoke? Raise your hands who knew about it. Less than 10 people. Why? Because as long as things can be hidden under a carpet, as long as the news doesn't carry, as long as the decision makers from the ministries of finance or the heads of government or heads of state are not in the room, we can have polite conversation that gives the impression of movement. When we met in Barbados last year, it was to bring a number of things to a head. The continued belief that countries can finance development with 7 and 10-year and 12-year money shorter than their citizens getting a mortgage. The continued belief that the countries of the global south must pay a premium to borrow money from the global north, either as public sector entities or private sector companies. The continued unconscious bias that regrettably passes across this world. And, you know, I should get easier and gentler with each day, week, and month, because the conversation is beginning to go in the right direction. But I'm actually getting angrier, because this morning at one of our meetings, it was reflected, and as the minister reflected who was in the room, it was the deputy minister, it was the minister of state, it was the minister of this. Last time I checked, there are less than 200 leaders in the world. It is impossible for you to tell me that you have a group of 7 countries and they cannot meet to address the fate of more than half of the world's population. It is impossible for broadcasters to say that something that took over 1,000 lives in Malawi, a couple hundred lives in Mozambique, is not worthy of repetition, especially since the length of the storm has created history. But then again, in the Bahamas, how many people remember that the reason why we had the problems in the Bahamas with their last hurricane is that it did the unthinkable, that it went over the Bahamas and sat for 48 hours. Now, I've grown up with hurricanes all our lives, all my life. And the notion of a hurricane sitting on any country for 6 hours, 8 hours is horrific. But for 48 hours, you can't withstand that. So that we have just the luck or the misfortune that for the first time in a very long time, the very issues confronting the global south are equally confronting the global north. And that we have to rise above the discriminatory nature of the relationship, the unequal yoking in a post-independence era, that will allow us to be able to lower and level the cost of debt, that will allow the people of the Global South to be seen, heard, and felt, and to be considered in the making of policy. And for you to believe that Italy can declare a state of emergency this week to deal with migration and that it is going to be an isolated incident is to bury our heads in the sand. The global north needs the investment in the global south if they are to preserve the stability, the security, and ultimately the prosperity of the planet and by extension of themselves. Now, I get really curious when I hear, therefore, that people are not ready or people want to kick the ball down the road, because what's happening in Florida as we speak, Marc-Andre, you just mentioned to me, Florida is underwater. How much more must happen? How many more people must lose their lives until the conscience of a few leaders, and I'm not calling anybody out now.
Why not?
Leaders.
Go ahead.
But leaders. No, your job is to make it sexy and to get listenership. My job is to
I will.
My job is to reflect the reality of our condition.
Well, let me before you. I don't want you to finish, but I do want to say that we're on sort of day 4 of IMF World Bank Week. I have not been able to follow what's gone on inside those buildings. I will take stock, the moment later. Is there any sense that the urgency that you're calling forth, both in the article and today, is registering, or is the posture you're hearing, we'll get to this, kick it down the road? They're not demonstrating an intensity of at least investigation. So I'm just interested in because I don't know what the tone is among leaders right now.
As I said in here yesterday, there has been movement. But there can be
anyone you want to praise?
There can be movement if I move from 220 pounds to 210 pounds. But am I healthy at 210? So that the bottom line is this, that while there has been movement, the conversation remains vague as to scope, as to timelines, and as to specific measures needed. And my thing is that we are in an interregnum because you have a new president potentially to come to the World Bank,
right,
and we're holding meetings with a president that's leaving. By the same token, the beauty of perception is the ability to discern. I have been coming to Washington for a couple of years. Other than when I was co-chair of the Development Committee, and even then, I was told that I didn't have a right to speak and that I was only supposed to introduce speakers. I then chose to use each introduction as a 2-minute speech. There is something fundamentally wrong. I don't know who. I was co-chair of the Development Committee 2 years ago. But I haven't attended a development committee meeting in the last 2 years. There is something fundamentally wrong with a system that does not give opportunity to its membership to have a voice.
Right.
And the fact that I have to come outside like a protester,
right,
as if I am a temporary interloper, having been elected by a country, by the way, with all of the seats, not once but twice, but yet I'm being told that I am to speak as if I'm an interloper. Now, I may appear to be a little more angry this evening, and it's largely because my blood boiled when I heard the minister from Malawi speak. And I say to you that as long as we refuse to see, these things are going to continue to happen. And I do not know what else it will take, because it is clear to all that this world is in a climate crisis. I don't use climate change. Climate change is for people who don't understand crisis.
Well, let me play not a counterpoint, but ask Andrew something. What I found so seductive about the article was that while I agree with everything you said, and that the power of this moment, would you see the drama and the trauma in the world that demands attention, it also needs a plan. And what technicians and bureaucrats need are a 5-point plan. There's a 3-point plan with little, an A, a B, and a C. And as I understand it, and I'm going to butcher this, part one is we have got a crisis right now, and part one is the existing loan structure need to be renegotiated. You've got to basically take interest rates. You've got to find all the various and I loved how you flirted with the technical dimensions of how to do it in these different categories of basically suspending, forgiving loans, drawing on SDRs. That's part one. Part two is a new loan regime is needed along the lines of what Prime Minister just spoke about, of extending the length of terms, below interest rates coming in. And then part three, which I found really interesting, is shaming the private sector into providing more broad public goods, like in structures like Gavi, et cetera. So that is my understanding of the Bridgetown Initiative. Now, I know there are going to be a lot more here, but from a perspective of someone who deals with a lot of drab people, those kinds of things are somehow seductive and help you get both the track that deals with, that this is a major moment, but it also gives somebody a way to begin processing it. Let me ask the Prime Minister something here, and this may sound naive and silly, but I live in the naive and silly world. I'm interested in why we don't have graphics in the New York Times or the Post that show how much progress is being made on the initiatives you're laying out and how much not. So I would tell you, just as a friendly person in this, from a media perspective, it would be interesting to see a chart of what's needed to do this, to sort of look at reporting, so that as you're telling us now that you see some movement, well, let's put that on a chart, on a graph, and let's see whether it's moving forward or not, and then feed it to people like me or some of the other media there to show over time, both the urgency in this. So it's just a thought on addressing what you're saying is something right now that needs immediate attention.
And I understand that, and that's part of it, that we need to keep the language simple and keep the communication simple. The reality is, and I'm certainly going to take it up, because this morning we learned from the Minister of Finance of Senegal that the World Bank gave Africa last year $9 billion in funding, but it gave the Ukraine $23 billion and fast-tracked the Ukraine, but it didn't fast-track Africa. I can tell you this afternoon that I was looking at my interest costs alone. And last year, for my loan for COVID, which I had to beg the World Bank for and get it as exceptional access because I'm a middle-income country whose income is too high, but China is a low-income country, that my interest rate on that loan has gone from 1.09% to 5.48% this year. Now, that's a 400% increase in 1 year. My loans at the IMF have gone from 1.077% to 3.916%. My loans at the Latin American Development Bank have gone from 1.9% to a range of 4.47 to 6.96%.
Can you take a
and not to be
screen
outdone,
grab of that and send it me?
At the Caribbean Development Bank, they've gone from 3.3 to 4.9%. My simple point is, and I agree with you, we can put those metrics there, but without context, it's not going to mean anything. The Ecuadorian Minister of Foreign Affairs said this week, and it resonated with me, that 1.5 degrees does not mean anything to the average person.
That's
because
right.
If I pull up my weather app, in Washington today, the temperature is going to go from 50-something degrees to 80-something degrees.
Yeah.
So we're fooling ourselves by believing that technical language is causing the anger. What's causing the anger is 108 degrees in Europe last summer.
Right.
What's causing the anger is the tornadoes and the floods and the hurricanes and the cyclones. What's causing the anger is the droughts.
Right.
So we need to get that. Thank you, Andrew, for using the natural disaster clauses, because Grenada was the first to use them. Barbados then took it up, and until now, Barbados has been the largest issuer of them. Now, I want to explain the difficulty of getting people to change, and that's why I'm really thanking you from the bottom of my heart. Something that is simple and a no-brainer and costs nothing. That you have a climatic event, that you suspend the payment of the debt for 2 years to preserve the integrity of the instrument, rather than worrying whether I'm going to pay or not. Now, if you can't get people to accept that when it costs them nothing, and it simply requires a decision making on a legal clause, tells you the scale of the opposition. Similarly, if we have a position where people don't, and I don't believe that there's anybody who has done this in the increase of interest rates on existing loans as an act of wickedness, but they have done it unconsciously, and they have allowed us to have to face increases of 200 to 400% in interest rates, not on new loans, but on existing loans. Existing loans where the old interest rates were guaranteeing them a rate of return and profitability. And something has to be fundamentally wrong when we are too large to fail. But if banks are too big to fail, institutions must not be too large to fail. And that is exactly how it feels. So I want us to pause and to recognize that if we don't deconstruct and reconstruct with warp speed, to use President Trump's phrase with the vaccine, with warp speed, then what we are going to see is countries falling down. At the beginning of this session this afternoon, the Deputy Secretary General of the UN told us there are now 52 countries on death row. If there were 52 people on death row, people would be jumping up. There are 52 countries times millions, adding up to billions who are on death row. What will it take? Do we have to go through Paris and New York and Marrakesh and Dubai? And in the meantime, what happens to the people who are relying on this for jobs and for food and for healthcare? I didn't even get to education yet. And that is what concerns me. And I'm saying to you that we can't hide finance and treasury from development. We can't hide finance and treasury from the other ministries. And what is happening is that we're giving excuses, but what is not changing is the intensity. Now, let me also be clear, and I'll make this last point. This is not an academic session. And nobody has brought money to the table yet on adaptation in any serious way. Nobody has brought money for loss and damage. My country, in about a week, 10 days, will go and issue blocks for natural gas. I don't want oil. We do not want oil. But we will issue for natural gas and to be able to make hydrogen. Why? Because whether we like it or not, there are 300,000 people depending on us. Mm-hmm. And whether we like it or not, with increased interest rates and reduced opportunities for borrowing, and increased expenditure with hurricanes coming the first time in 66 years and a water-scarce country, we've got to meet the needs of people. And by saying no oil, a few oil and gas companies will laugh at us and say, oh, they're loony because you can't get gas without oil. Well, there's a small possibility. And then there are a few state-to-state partnerships that we will go for, and one or two may or may not take the option to have a future and to pay for that option for the future. And then maybe somebody might even say, we'll pay you to keep the natural gas in the ground. My simple point is that we have to do something, because the world is not doing anything at sufficient pace to allow us to meet the needs of our people. And the rest of the countries who have oil and gas, who may not want to say only gas, but who are prepared to use oil, are prepared to do it because they feel that the disparity in who benefits and who still has opportunity, because the International Energy Association says 2050 net zero is still 20% fossil fuel. Right. So that Chevron is still working, Total is still working, Eni is still working, all of the others are still working. Where's the equity?
Prime Minister, you're going to need to make this good.
I want to salute President Macron for his courage, because it cannot be easy to break away from the pack. And that's what he's done. By the same token, it's dangerous, because others may say, well, you didn't talk to us before you broke away. The truth is that none of us have time for niceties anymore. None of us. And I really do hope that we appreciate that in almost every faith, it doesn't allow us to see we don't get the panacea necessarily overnight as much as we live in an instantaneous world, that we build. Our problem is that we need to build with speed. And I believe that if you accept that, I keep telling people I'm a Jimmy Cliff girl. You can get it if you really want, but you must try and try and try. The bottom line is, I believe that Paris represents an opportunity for us to start to build a record as we go to COP28. We cannot go to COP28 with promises. The world no longer believes what comes out of COP. We need to go to COP28 with a record and not promises. And I believe that Paris offers the first opportunity, but there are a number of other stops along the way. And the natural disaster clauses, Andrew, as I said, I thank you and thank Britain for that. I believe that there is a chance for us to establish a climate mitigation trust, a catalytic fund, call it what you want, but it's focused only on lowering the costs and leveling the cost of debt between the global south and the global north for the private sector to help in achieving mitigation. A simple ambition. Right. If we can get a few countries together to be able to launch that, we go therefore with a record. And then we start the conversations with oil and gas, with heavy mining.
The informative information presented in this video is motivational and is positively aimed at inspiring, educating and entertaining the viewers with the cutting edge of critical reasoning. If you enjoy the contents on the Black Radar YouTube channel, please consider subscribing to show your support.
This is Mutabaruka. We want to present to you a wholesome kind of level of consciousness right now. So subscribe and tell your friend them. This is Mutabaruka.